now we're going to have Jacob, Diamond-Reivich, and other colleagues from Mito are going to show us their programming by demonstration system for creating Python code by working on a spreadsheet.
Yeah, totally. So maybe I'll start with giving a little bit of background. So recently graduated undergrad business school at the University of Pennsylvania, although it was like, quarantine graduation, so I'm not sure if it actually counts or not, but we'll see if I ever get the diploma in the mail. And so undergrad business school, I don't know if any of you did that, but a lot of spreadsheets. We kind of, I guess, gained a little bit of a passion for spreadsheets just, in 4 years of using it in finance classes or whatever. But spreadsheets, I think, are kind of limited in some ways, but also offer a lot of opportunities. And so we started building spreadsheets tools for finance, really like Excel add-ins back in June, May, I would say. And for two main reasons, we really strayed away from that. One is that it's pretty hard to develop in the Excel environment. It's pretty limited. I don't know if everyone's ever tried that, but it's not the best experience. And then two is the finance community, I'd say, is a little bit harder to get feedback on and really, build a grassroots tool around than, say, the data science community. Like, you would be hard pressed to hop on a Zoom call with this many nice people in the finance, this many bankers in the finance community talking about tooling. So definitely happy to be being in the data science community a bit more. But so the tool we're making, it's called Mito, and it is a extension to Jupyter Notebooks that lets you edit your data frame as a spreadsheet, and every edit you make translates back into Pandas code that you can use for reproducibility and extensibility. So let me share my screen and we'll just jump into it. There we go. We're used to using Google Meets for all our calls. The Zoom interface is much nicer, I will say. Cool. So here we're in our Jupyter Notebook, standard Jupyter Notebook. This is actually our website. So alpha.try-Mito is sort of our self-hosted place where we do these things. And I'm actually on the wrong tab here. Cool. Here we go. All right, and so I'm going to run this cell, and just quickly to, I guess, acquaint you with the Python it takes to get Mito up and running. So this Mito sheet, you have to have everything as a data frame to start, and this Mito sheet.sheet call is what renders your data frame into the Mito sheet. So we're passing in df1 and df2, and you see when you pass in multiple data frames, they appear as different tabs in an Excel workbook type. That's sort of the analogy, I guess, we're going for. And so yeah, here's your data represented. We have the column names and the actual data. And the first thing we're going to do is here's data set 1 and data set 2. And we see we have this user ID that sort of links the two. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to merge this together. And so this is our take on sort of a SQL type merge. If anyone's familiar with using SQL, that's sort of what we designed our merge after. So we have what sheets we're using, what the merge keys are, and then we can also select which columns we want to keep from each sheet that we're merging. And we're going to keep all of them for the purposes here. And we'll merge them. And then that will create a new data frame with all of the data together. So sort of like a SQL merge inside a spreadsheet, inside a Jupyter Notebook, if you can wrap your heads around that, which certainly took us some time to do. And then here you'll see this is the generated code from what we did. So this is that merge step here generated in Python. And as you'll see as we add more steps, that we represent this code in a stepwise feature or setting to make it a little bit more readable and understand the steps a little bit easier. And so I wanted to show you sort of some of our formulas. So I'm going to add a column here. So we say add column, and I'll just quickly show you that adding a column creates a step 2 where we've initialized that column. And let's put a formula in here. So let's say we have the user ID. Let's say we want to take the 3 left characters from the user ID. So we use our left function, and we can pick user ID 3, and we get the 3 left characters from the user ID here. So doing a bit of data cleaning here. And we'll notice that step 2 updates with the formula of that column. And then I guess I'll just quickly show you some of the other formulas. We actually no. Let me do a numerical one. So I will add another column here, and let's make this total visits divided by weekday visits. We get this number here, and yeah, we'll see the DF3 there. And now what we can do with this new value we have is we can do some filtering on this data. So let's say we want to do anything that is greater than or equal to 3. Filter down, and we'll see our data set shrunk a little bit. Got some of those values that were lower. And we see this filter is kept on here, or noted that it's kept on here by the highlighting there. And we'll see the equivalent Python here for that filter. And I'm just looking at the time here. So let's, I think another feature that'd be great to show is sort of our pivoting functionality. Something pivoting we've heard just from the users we talked to, and I'll talk a little bit more about our users and who we're engaging with at the end of this. But pivoting is something that definitely can be a bit of a pain point for people in Python. So we have our own take on it here, where you can choose. So let's say we're going to pivot on the user type. So you see we have free and paid users, and we're going to do the sum of the. Oh, oops, I'm on the wrong thing here. Sorry about that. We want the user type, and we're going to do it on the sum of their G value here. And we'll group, and we'll get a new data frame that has this value. So this is our pivot feature there. And then the last thing I'll show you is what you can do is and this is sort of going after the repeatability part. So you really only have to do this process once if you're going on a repeatable analysis. So we can save this analysis we've done here as, let's call it test 7. And now if we have similarly structured data sets, so you can imagine here a process that you're doing, it's like a data cleaning process you're doing daily, monthly, weekly, whatever the cadence is, and you get similarly structured data maybe coming out of a CRM system or something like that, and you wanted to rerun that analysis every time, but you don't want to have to do the code each time, or you don't want to have to do the steps in the Mito sheet each time. We save our analyses. I can run this cell, and now I can rerun this analysis on this cell here. Oops, why? Let's just rerun a different one. Cool, this is a different saved analysis, but yeah, we can see, so this was a merge step. But you see I had this merge here saved, and now I can rerun this merge as a sort of like a saved macro, Python macro inside of our Mito sheet. And so yeah, this I think is sort of gives you a range of the functionality we support, lots of spreadsheet functionality used for data cleaning or data manipulation. And then just, I guess with the last maybe 90 seconds here before we go into questions, we'd just love to talk about sort of where we're at as a project. So we've been posting on lots of subreddits. We've been fortunate to be at the top of like Excel subreddit, which was like definitely a new community for us and things like that. And so we've got a lot of signups. We have a wait list of people waiting to use the tool. And we have about 40 active users right now using it. And it's a broad range of people. And the interest is really twofold. The primary interest is as sort of as a process automation tool. So you can imagine it's like a VBA macro, but it's with Python. And I think the advantage there is too, I think a big counter argument we get a lot of the time is like, why not just use VBA? And there's two things. One is that being backed by Python instead of VBA opens you up to a lot more speed and robustness that VBA lacks. And then two is that there's so many packages associated with Python that we can tap into that VBA doesn't. So we're not at that functionality yet, but you can imagine in the future, incorporating machine learning packages that would be much harder for something like VBA or Excel to handle. Lots of different advanced analyses that are already in the Python environment that we can tap into because that's where we exist. So yeah, that process automation is the first one, and the second is we've seen it as a great learning tool for Excel or for Python rather. So people are going to come in and remembering pandas syntax is really hard, and this actually saves people. We've heard from just talking to our users a lot of trips to Stack Overflow, which is maybe one of the biggest pain points there is in terms of using Python. So yeah, those are the use cases, and I could talk more about the users, but I'd love to open up to questions. I think would be now.
All right, let's thank Jacob. Yeah, it's great to see programming by demonstration in a setting where you're trying to actually make a practical tool for people to use, and you have users trying it out. Yeah, it's great to see. So, does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask? All right, looks like Ravi got his hand up first, so take it away, Ravi.
Cool. Thanks for the demo and thanks for the talk. Really nice work. This reminds me a little bit of Mary Beth's nice keynote earlier today, where she mentioned her and her colleagues' work on Mage, which was also trying to basically interpret spreadsheet actions as code like this. And one of the challenges that she mentioned was that because each user interaction is being interpreted as code, the code basically keeps growing and growing and growing. And so I'm curious to find out whether there's kind of any future plans to try to like refactor or clean up the code that's generated in case users want to, rewrite it in a way that's either easier to understand or abstract in the future, or whether you think this kind of like, individual interpret each interaction as a new code snippet is the kind of long-term way to go.
Yeah, it's a great question and something we've definitely thought about. I would be remiss if I didn't have Nate chime in here because he definitely thinks about them most.
Yeah, definitely. It's a really interesting question. So I think there's two kind of points to highlight on. The first one is that users understand their actions translating to code in a very direct way. So essentially, like we experimented a bit with like, we call it code block optimization, where we kind of, you did a bunch of things that result in only one transformation at the end of the day. Let's collapse those. And ultimately what ends up happening is users say, I don't understand, where did my code go? So I think there's essentially from a usability perspective, there's a real strong argument for just keeping it as a linear list of actions. From a maintainability, understandability perspective long-term, especially as we begin to think about repeat analysis and kind of running these workflows, there is definitely kind of an optimization argument. But the way we're thinking about it currently is definitely as a user opt-in. The user chooses to go through an optimization process that results in kind of a new script. But making it manual allows them to kind of understand what's actually happening versus all of it happening behind the scenes. It's something that we got burned on a couple of times and we confused the hell out of some people, I'll tell you that. Yeah, good question. Thanks.
Cool, that makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a really interesting insight. Raleigh, I think you had a question.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for the great talk. Yeah, so my question was about the kind of operations that you were applying when you were creating formulae. So it seemed that most of the operations you were kind of creating there were kind of column-wise, if you like, rather than row-like. Mm-hmm. In a spreadsheet, you kind of typically you put a formula into a cell, and if you want to apply it to a column, that would mean kind of essentially copying that formula down the column, or maybe dragging it in using one of these fancy kind of Excel features. So I kind of like the emphasis on sort of column-wise operations, because I think that's often what you want to do. So I was wondering, that then suggests, well, is there an opportunity to kind of develop a new kind of spreadsheet interface that supports that a bit more naturally, as a style of programming? Because it's something you very commonly do in data science, is you operate on arrays and tensors, and you lift operations to operate on those kind of vectors. And that's not something you can commonly do in spreadsheets, but it seems like you're kind of heading that way with this. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's a really great point and something we definitely thought about. I think you really mentioned, I think, the crux of it, which is like, this is a spreadsheet geared for data science, not necessarily geared for the types of analyses you do in Excel. And for that reason, yeah, a lot of these data sets are really large, and you're not going through at a granular level and changing every row. You're really applying a stepwise process, column by column, to achieve some output. But yeah, and in terms of optimizing, I think with your point, making a spreadsheet that really is geared towards that column, column framework. I think we're kind of on that path now. Somewhat, we've definitely had thoughts about allowing row edits, being able to go in and change a particular piece of data. That's actually a feature that people have asked for, where it's you're doing some data cleaning process and you want to go change one piece of data that's messed up for some reason. Doing that in pandas can be a little bit of a nuisance, but going into a spreadsheet and just finding that row and clicking a button and typing in a new editing something is actually pretty easy from a, like, I guess, an ergonomic standpoint. So yeah, I think right now we're probably optimizing for the column-wise feature, but I do think in the future we will support a bit more flexibility, even if that's not the goal of the project. I think just having that option will be really kind to the users.
Thank you.
Mark, you're up next.
Thank you. Great talk, guys. Really excited to see you working on something that's so polished. And
Thanks.
I'm interested to get your perspective as I know at least one of you are business school graduates. Maybe the others are involved in that space as well. I'm really interested to get your perspective on how the people in that world have been receiving this work. Maybe not everybody, but I know a number of the people here are from more of an academic perspective. We're used to seeing these sort of program transformations, code generation. Is there an excitement about this, or have you needed to convince investors and users and the various people you're talking to that, hey, this is really worthwhile? Or how does that conversation go?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say it's very industry specific. So I think generally there is an excitement, especially moving from spreadsheet workflows to Python workflows. The way we've seen is often I guess in business there's sort of this like spectrum of like business analyst who uses Excel to data scientist who's very heavy into Python, and they're often trying to do similar tasks, but just their skill set leads them to a different medium. And we've seen sort of just a trend in like pushing that skill set up a little bit more generally towards things like Python. One of the reasons is there's just so much more data available in the world, and like using big data in analysis is growing day by day, and Excel is not geared towards large data sets. 1 million lines of data is the strict limit, and for most people on their computers, trying to do anything with 100,000 lines of data on Excel is pretty abysmal. But I think the interesting question that we've come up against is, or not come up against, but just experienced when talking to business people about it is, especially ones who are interested in Python, the question is like, are they interested in Python because they want to learn Python, or are they interested in Python because they want faster processing? They want to be able to do these analyses they're already doing in the spreadsheet, but on larger data sets. And we think our tool kind of meets them in the middle there, which is, you can, if you don't want to interact with Python that much, you really don't have to. It takes this one line of Python here, mitosheet.sheet, to render the data frame, to render the mitosheet. You can do all the edits you want, and then you can save that analysis and never have to touch the edits even again. So it's sort of saving, you can interact entirely within the mitosheet for 95% of your workflow. But then also, because we're giving you the code, it gives you the option to then go, you either learn Python from it or incorporate this Python script into a larger code base. So yeah, I think that there definitely is an interest, but there's a spectrum of people who really want to learn Python or really just want to, I guess, increase the efficiency of their workflow.
Thank you.
All right, I think we have time for Ravi. You had another question.
Thanks. Yeah, so following up on all of those great points about how this can be a really great way to kind of teach and learn how to write Python code. I'm curious. So I think right now, like in the generated code, there are these like do not edit kinds of comments. In the future, I'm kind of curious about how you're thinking about going about allowing changes to the program itself and maintaining the connection between the code and the output. Ambiguity and that kind of thing is a big challenge in this space. So I'm kind of curious about how you're thinking about going about that.
Yeah, I'll give a little bit of light, and then Nate, maybe if you want to chime in, or Aaron. So yeah, currently, definitely when we set out, I think we were thinking a lot about this like two-way bridge between Python and Excel, and just from a I guess for lack of a better term, because I hate to use this word, go-to-market strategy. We've really been focused more on the spreadsheet to Python, sort of a one-way highway. And that's just made building a little bit easier. It's made the mental model for our users much easier as well. Specifically in the markets that we're talking to. But in the future, we definitely do have ideas about how to make it a little bit more of a two-way bridge. And Nate, maybe you want to chime in here.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the general case, this is unsubstantiated, but it's an unsolvable problem in the general case, right? Transpiling a piece of Python code back to a spreadsheet edit. There are, of course, like there's a limited subset of the language you could probably operate on to get backwards, but you know, we didn't design Python, and we didn't design Python for a spreadsheet, so it's a little bit hard to go backwards. I think there's one interesting point here, which is how much the backwards direction leads to learning generally, right? Because the flow through seeing the Python code that's generated is very helpful in terms of learning Python. But the other thing that's really helpful is editing the Python and seeing what changes that might make and how that compares to the mental model that you have. So there's definitely reasons we're interested in it. It's a very costly, expensive thing, and we're living on ramen right now, so we're trying to get it to a place where it's usable rather than a place where it's perfect. And I think this is kind of the first thing that goes out the window from like a real practical usability perspective. As an ideological interest thing, we love it. It would be cool as hell, but it's not so particularly useful to our users. So
yeah, I would piggyback off that, in that there was a lot of things from the beginning where we were like, oh, this is super cool, we want to do this, but really we've over time we've become more interested in what our users are interested in, which I think has ultimately been very beneficial for us.
Yeah, thanks for the questions.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah, let's thank the Mito folks once again.
That was, yeah, thank you. I just want to say I would love we're a free tool, so if everyone, I'll drop our link to the website in the chat. But if anyone wants to use it, please do. We'll get you set up very quickly. But thank you for having us.
Yeah.